Hello everyone. I am Aisha Hogan. I am the founder and the founder of iausm, which is the International Academy of Universal Self-Mastery. And I'm the host of I Got This, which is one of my podcasts. And I have two of our iausm faculty, well, part of our dream team, actually. This is the dream team that's with me today on the panel as we talk about, I think, a very important subject, and I think something that we don't realize that we need to be doing in every moment of our lives is graciousness. So before we get into that, though, I would like Patricia to introduce herself.
Hi everybody. I am Patricia Madalena. I'm over here in the UK, in Wales, and I work with Aisha and Gail. We're part of the dream team in iausm, which is awesome. I run 3 businesses. I'm a therapist by trade. I have been since 2004. And off the back of that, I decided to create something called Wiggle Bums and Wiggle Kids, which is a kids yoga, mindfulness and sensory play teacher training. That has grown over 4 years. And we have teachers now all across the world, from Canada and America to the UK to China, and spreading that message of consciousness across the globe to every family that comes and sits on our mats. And yeah, I'm dedicated to the power of positive psychology. I use it every day in my personal and professional life. And I love being part of the dream team. I love working with Aisha and Gail, and I'm excited about today's podcast. Thank you.
Thanks, Patricia. Thank you so much. And Gail, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Well, hello everybody, and I'm also here in the UK. I'm in London, and I'm Gail Edwards. And my thing, if you like, is that everybody should have the opportunity to explore and expand into the magic of who they truly are. And that's why I love iausm. And I do this in my own business, which is all around branding, personal branding, communications, really being able to stand up in your own hallelujah, which is one of my signature programs, actually, so that people can very clearly, very confidently, and very articulately talk about who they are, what they do, who they do it for, why they do it even. And it's beyond the standard marketeer garb of, your why should make you cry, or you've got to know your why, you've got to know your ideal customer. All of that stuff is great and it all works, but it's deeper than that for me. This is about coming from the place where your soul knows exactly what to do. Your soul knows exactly who you are. And that kind of feeds into all of my work and all the messaging that I help people to create. And it fits in perfectly with the ethos of iausm. And that's why I'm here. And like Patricia, I love being part of iausm. I love being part of the dream team because, it's bigger than me. All of this stuff is much bigger than me. This is about, what is it creating for everybody else? How is this showing up in the world for everybody else? So that's why I'm here. So looking forward to today, Aisha.
Thank you. And thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited about sharing this particular topic of graciousness because in this moment, for those of us who are kind of sensing that there's something going on right now beyond COVID, we're feeling some changes happening in the world. We're feeling some shifts, however slight, and some are very big, happening in our own evolution. But one of the things that we're not considering, a lot of people are not aware of in evolution, is that there is another part of evolution called involution. And that's the changes that are happening within us, the changes that are happening in our energy, which is why sometimes lately we've been feeling a little off from time to time. And, we blame it on, retrograde and eclipses and all these other things, which absolutely do play a part in it. But the biggest thing that's happening is that we're changing on the inside. And what I mean by that is our energy is changing, our frequency is changing, our vibration is changing. So it's also part of the evolution. And we really need to start paying attention to how gracious we're being to everyone, because the shadow of graciousness is dishonor. And one of the things, and this is a big thing that we've been doing, last week we talked, a couple weeks ago actually, we talked about unconditioning the conditioning. And a lot of that conditioning is based around dishonor, because we dishonor other people, we dishonor other races, we dishonor other cultures, we dishonor ourselves, we dishonor the people that we say that we love. We don't live in a state of graciousness. And even being someone who is known as a healer, I am a money guru. I work with people in all kinds of aspects of their life, including being the founder of iausm. But I have to ask myself, and I ask everyone who's listening to ask themselves, we preach it. We preach kindness. We preach respecting everyone else and respecting ourselves. But do we live it? Do we live it, especially when it counts the most during the biggest struggles in our lives? And when those things show up, it could be as easily as we got cut off while we were driving and we turn around and we're yelling at someone out the window. And that's not being gracious. So graciousness is about really, it's a gift because it touches everyone that it comes in contact with. And it's about always considering the feelings of others, the impact of what we say, what we do, and how it affects somebody else. And at the same time, while you're respecting them and their feelings and who they are, it's about also self-respect. And that's where the balance comes in. That's where the dance of graciousness is, because it's also respecting yourself while you're respecting them. And it is definitely a challenge to do that. But at the same time, it's something that must be done. So if we say that we're gracious and kind, I guess the question is not when, it's easy to be gracious and kind when nothing's going on. But are we gracious and kind in those moments where we need to be that more than any other time? What are your thoughts on that, ladies?
Yeah, graciousness whilst putting gracious boundaries in place. Because boundaries come into all of that as well, doesn't it? I mean, if we're going to be gracious and compassionate with others and gracious and compassionate with ourselves, the next kind of phase is usually about putting boundaries in place and being able to speak from that authentic space. Graciousness, I suppose, means to me being kind and thoughtful and aware. But it also means living from my heart, from that grateful state of being, that true sense of self and awareness of myself and who I am within any given situation. And then when that happens, we can step out of judgment and the blame game and into a more compassionate state of being, into a more realistic, what is truly happening here. In a situation, what is truly happening and going on for me right now, whether I'm being triggered or what kind of emotional state is happening for me, and how I can graciously move from that state. If I am being triggered, if I have been cut up by someone in the road and that I've been triggered, what are the steps? It's about growing that self-awareness for self and other, isn't it? That kind of happens after the event when you start practicing this stuff and you're a newbie to it. You might wind down your window and shout and bawl and yell, and then afterwards think about what you could have done differently. But as you go down that path, it's an art, isn't it? It's a skill, and you become skillful at being gracious and being able to step inside somebody else's shoes for a moment and work out the whys and wherefores of their behavior. But within all of that, we don't want to become a spiritual doormat. We don't want to become someone where we are so gracious, no one else is being gracious back to us. So that imbalance can happen. So it's a brilliant topic to explore, the graciousness of oneself and how we are, but also in terms of how other people are treating us and how we could put our boundaries in place graciously, and also ask for what we need when we need it, from that place of compassion, from that place of authentic living.
Mm.
That's for sure. I've been studying graciousness a lot in human design, and the really interesting thing about it is it doesn't really matter if someone else is being gracious or not.
Right.
The art of graciousness is that you remain gracious. And it's also that, and that's what I'm saying, in those times when people are not being gracious to us, when people are being rude to us, disrespectful, or in one of the 6 core wounds of humanity, which is they're in repression or denial or shame or rejection or guilt or separation. And when these things happen, that's the moments that we must be most gracious.
And then from there, um, not to be inauthentic, if one isn't gracious in that moment and one is triggered by somebody's blame or judgment, well, there's a lot of it happening at the moment. A lot of blame and judgment and separation is coming down from above. I mean, in politics, and then it's seeping out into society. So there's a lot of that happening at the moment. But if you are triggered and that's authentic, it's about looking inside of that, isn't it, to find the graciousness that potentially is hidden inside of that upset and sadness um and and crossness maybe, and finding that true sense of graciousness, not just kind of fake it till you make it graciousness, or I have to be gracious in this moment. um it's all right to be upset, it's all right to be um, cross about something. It's all right to feel separated or judged if someone is actually doing that to you. Um, and also, it's all right to be gracious and put your boundaries in place and sort out what your trigger is and look deep inside for that place of that higher sense of self where you can walk in someone else's shoes, and find that sense of true forgiveness, I suppose, if someone isn't being gracious with you, and then graciously finding another way to be.
Mm. I agree with both of you, and particularly you, Aisha, regarding the whole concept of graciousness from the human design perspective. Grace for me is about honoring self. It's for me, I agree with what you're saying in terms of it doesn't matter whether another person is being gracious to me or not, because, or whether they exhibit grace or not. That doesn't really matter to me. What matters more to me is that I am gracious, and as it happens, grace happens to be one of my values, actually. So this is a subject quite close to my heart. And how graciousness shows up for me is not in the road rage and type examples that you've given, because I personally don't really suffer from road rage, to be honest. And I always think that people that do just don't have good enough music in their car. I think if you had good enough music in your car, you wouldn't have time to be triggered by other people on the road. So that's how I kind of handle those day-to-day situations where we can get easily triggered. However, grace for me is about not just honoring myself, but being respectful. There's certain things that I just don't do. And it's not because I'm a saint or a martyr or anything like that. It's just that they're just not part of my personality. So, for example, I can disagree with somebody, but I don't have to be argumentative with that person. I can very clearly state my perspective on something which may be different without having to resort to um, personal barbs and insults, which is something we see happen so often nowadays. I mean, crumbs in the UK. I don't know what it's like for you guys in Canada, Aisha, but here in the UK, literally every day, multiple times a day, you know, the minds of the masses are being manipulated by our media to think a certain way about certain individuals, about certain things that are going on, because it helps to feed into the narrative. And some people are adopting that and are in a permanent state of outrage. And being gracious in amongst all of that is just being firm in my belief and being able to state that without getting into that permanent state of outrage. Because to me, outrage is not gracious. You know, it's like I would even take it further and challenge and question and say, is grace the same as dignity? Because what I've been seeing play out here in the UK with many situations, whether it be our government, whether it be the monarchy, Harry and Meghan seem to be, the evil ones of the media at the moment, and they remain silent on those particular points, and people say, oh, that's a dignified silence. I actually think they're just graceful. They just do what they do. They've said what they've said, and they just get on and do it. To me, that's grace. That's very graceful. There's no he said, she said. It's just, this is how it is for us. Whether you believe it or not, fine. The same with the government. You know, every day. Today we're all talking about this blinking party that they're supposed to have had last Christmas when the whole country was in lockdown, and some people are really vociferous in their that is not a graceful way of handling that. For me, the government are not being graceful in how they're handling it. So that's how it shows up for me, and that's how I tend to handle it.
Government is definitely in the state of dishonor. I believe now, especially since I think, at some point on some level, everyone is understanding that something's changing in the air. There's changes happening in the air, and I think things are getting a little worse now when it comes to government and media and stuff, because they're starting to want to. They're feeling their power slipping away. Whether they want to admit it or not, and they're feeling this power slipping away, and they are far from gracious. I do believe what you said. Like, I completely agree that, those, Meghan and Harry, and the fact that they're being really quiet and just like, hey, I'm just living my life, and you do you and I'll do me, and that's okay, and not fighting, battling back, is awesome. I think they are being, I in total agreement. I think that they're being super gracious in that way, regardless of all the stuff and that's difficult. It's difficult to be gracious in the face of dishonor, and especially when you go to the grocery store and their pictures are plastered everywhere, and you go and you read this stuff about them, and I'm sure they're hearing all kinds of things, and still to remain gracious through all of it. That's an art. It's an art. It's something that they've taken in within them. I think, to be gracious is it's an inner change. It's not something you're just doing. It's not something you're implementing. It's something that you are or you are not. And if you are not gracious, then it's a time to look and inner reflect and say, how do I become that? And I think also we react too quickly to things. Like, we get so, it's a fast-paced world, right? So when things happen, our automatic reaction is to react to what's happening. And I think what we don't do, and this is where we lose our graciousness when we don't do this, is to pause. Something happens, don't react. Pause. What does this really mean? What does this really mean for me? Is this something that I need to respond to? Maybe my first response wasn't going to be the best response. And it's about taking that moment and really opening up your awareness. And Patricia's going to hate what I'm going to say now, but I'm starting to not feel the word mindfulness anymore, because it's mindful. Our mind is full of stuff, right? So when you break down the word, it's more about that mindfulness is now evolving into something of being more aware of yourself, being more aware about how you feel about things, being more aware of your intuition, taking that moment to pause before you react. And it's not always easy to do, but to try to implement these pragmatic tools into your life, where you say, you know what, I'm going to disconnect from that right now, and I'm going to connect over here, and I'm going to go back to that when I feel it's the right time, and when I can deal with it in a more gracious manner. Right? I don't know if that makes sense to you. What do you think, Patricia?
Oh, I totally agree. I think mindfulness is an old paradigm from last millennium. Mindful and mindful is two different things, isn't it? When your mind is full of all that stuff and all that chaos of what has happened and what could happen, then mindfulness comes in, and one of its main things is to observe your thoughts and feelings from a distance. So it's to press that pause button and come into observer mode. You can have a mindful moment. I mean, the only difference is one L or two L's at the end of the word. But being mindful over the years, mixing mindfulness and mixing all sorts of different modalities that I'm sure both of you have dabbled with over the last 20 years, you come to a place when you truly do that inner work. You no longer have to be mindful. Mindful is about creating a moment in time when the stimulus comes in and you're triggered and you respond in that old conditioning that may not be beneficial for you. And then as you're going down that path, you notice the patterns that are happening. You start becoming more mindful, and you might do a few courses or whatnot, and you learn to press the pause button, you learn to become observer. The stimulus comes in and you don't respond immediately. You take that breath, you take that stand back, and you observe the situation. And then you make a choice, a conscious choice, which is creative. You're moving from reaction into creation, which is great. But then we go on to the next stage of it all, which all three of us kind of come at from a different angle. But we're definitely, that's where our masterdom comes in, is that we work with the trigger, that bit inside of you that was triggered. It's okay. It's still there, even if you're mindful and you learn the tools to pause and observe and step back and be in creation rather than reaction. That trigger's still there unless you go inside, go deep and find the core reason for that trigger and bring back the missing part of your soul, or all the sorts of different ways that one can go and reclaim those parts, those moments of separation, which creates the trigger.
But just kind of taking that point a little bit further, actually, from what Patricia is saying, is that, and from what you were saying as well, Aisha, is that grace is such an inner, it is such an inner being. To me, grace is a feeling. Okay, it's a real feeling. And when you say that, things like mindfulness and like all these other modalities that Patricia was mentioning, that many of us are familiar with, that we've done and whatever, it's not that they don't work. They all work, and they're all very, very suitable for, depending on where people are, because you've got to meet them where they are. But I also think that when we grace, to me, is like a hack. That's how I would put it. It's like a hack of all of those modalities, because when we really are truly graceful, then all those other things like mindfulness, like even meditation, they just happen. They are the bonus. They're the byproducts of being graceful. And people often think that meditation is something where you have to lie down on a yoga mat in complete silence, with your eyes closed for a certain amount of time, and then you're meditating. No, meditation is a state of mind. It's a state of being where you can calm your mind, and grace helps you to do that. And that's why I think grace is more of a feeling and an experience rather than something to do. It just is. And that's the skill, though. The skill is, how do you adapt a being of gracefulness? And that's the thing that I think most people will be challenged with. It's like, okay, well, I get it, I hear it, but how do I become graceful?
Yeah, well, for me, over the last 20 years, how I've become more graceful and more in that state of being, rather than the doing, is finding those parts that aren't in grace, is going in and finding those little dissociated parts that are in trauma or in ungraceful states of being, and bringing them back on board. And then once those parts have been satisfied and loved and acknowledged and seen and heard, and they're back on board, meaning they're part of the whole, part of me, and no longer being triggered, it's an expansion into that state of being graceful. It's an expansion into that state of being home and at one and at ease with oneself, rather than being or doing, all of those modalities, which is willpower, takes willpower.
Well, the good thing, and I agree that I totally agree. You do definitely need to deal with your triggers and the things that are taking you out of being graceful, taking you out of grace. Absolutely. But at the same time, there's also things that you can, while you're doing that work, Gail mentioned one of them, meditation. There's also ways of practicing graciousness. And meditation is one place where you can go deep inside and connect with that grace in you, and feel it and sense it. And other things are some of our skills and our arts, like through our music, through our writing, through our art, creativity. These are also beautiful outlets for graciousness. It doesn't have to be sitting down and meditating. It could be something else. It could be your own bringing kindness and graciousness into the world.
I agree, absolutely. And I'm so glad that you mentioned kindness as well, because I don't think that you can be graceful without kindness. Because by the very nature of what gracefulness is and what it means and how it feels, we have to be kind, not just to ourselves, but to others. And it's like I was saying before, it's about disagreement. You can disagree with people and still be kind to them. Anyone that follows me on my non-professional account on Twitter will know that I'm a big advocate for the Sussexes, and I disagree with people with their opinions about them all the time. But I always ensure that I come from a place of kindness and of respect as well, because just because we don't agree doesn't mean that we can be disrespectful. I mean, the very nature of internet trolling goes against that very grain, of course, but then I don't identify as an internet troll, so I can be kind. But so I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Aisha, because I think that's a really important part of it as well.
Well, I mean, graciousness is human kindness, right? I mean, according to, the gene keys, when you talk about graciousness, it's the milk of human kindness, right? So it's a difficult dance, though. Like, I'm not going to lie. It's a beautiful word. It's a wonderful feeling. And we try very hard. Well, we don't try. We be as much as we can in that space. I don't want to say try. Try is a non-committal. We be as much as we can in that space. But there's moments, right? And then that's where you have to turn your kindness in on yourself and be like, okay. And then practice what Patricia said. Why did I step out of my graciousness? Why was I unkind? And what energy do I want to sit in? The other day I drove, I think I shared this with both of you. I'm not sure if I did, but I drove through we have an Indian reserve very close to me. And I drove through it to deliver a package that was unfortunately misdelivered to my house. So I was delivering it to the proper house on my way out. And I'd never driven into the reservation before. I'd never driven into the streets. And once I got in there, I felt like I had driven into a different world. And I saw how we have dishonored these people. And I felt this incredible energy of sadness come over me and anger. I felt anger. I'm not going to lie. And I drove into this space and I thought, this is how we're treating the indigenous. And then I thought, well, aren't we all indigenous? Aren't we all native to this planet? And why are they being segregated? But if you think about it, segregation is global. We segregate people because of race, because of color, because of language, because of culture, because of, are they vaccinated or not vaccinated? We segregate people for some reason. Humanity loves to throw people into containers, and I don't understand it. And I think segregation is one of the most dishonorable things that we can do to humanity, and yet it is done all over. And I think it's something that needs to completely be wiped off the planet for us to really evolve as humans and to be able to step into our grace.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here saying, I agree. And the only reason I'm pausing is because you can't argue with that. To me, that's just standard. But I'm thinking about this point, and Patricia made it earlier on actually, about triggers and really being able to manage those triggers, because we all have them. We all have them. Mine just isn't road rage, but I'm sure there's something else, that really, if I think about it hard enough, then I'm sure there's something that really does get my goat going. And I'm just wondering from that perspective, I'm trying to think of the way to articulate this actually. So I want to play devil's advocate, because we're talking about this, we're three people who practice this. We know this subject. So there may be someone listening to this thinking, well, it's okay for you. You guys know this stuff. You live, breathe, and eat this stuff. So I want to play devil's advocate for the people that don't, or just starting on their journey of discovery and exploration, ultimately expansion. How would they recognize, and like I said, I'm playing devil's advocate here, how would they recognize that they're not graceful? Because we know that what the benefits of grace are, as you've just eloquently said, Aisha. We know about kindness and that healthy respect for another person. But someone might think, well, I am actually graceful, I'm a nice person. What would be evident in them? What shows up that would make you think, like, for instance, Patricia or Aisha, if you were working with a client, because I know what I look for, that you would think, maybe a bit more grace might help them here. How would it be showing up for them?
So for a lot of my clients, we don't really work with the what would you do in this situation kind of vibe. We really go back to the core moments, releasing, because those coping strategies, what we do in those moments, in those patterns, people start becoming self-aware when their life becomes and feels uncomfortable, when they're up against it. They're repeating the same patterns. So it might be relationships. They might press the the button and change relationships quite a lot, but the same patterns of behavior, they keep attracting the same kind of partner, or the same kind of feelings are in them, like their partner might not do enough or earn enough or be enough, but actually in reality they probably are. It's just their feelings and thoughts around it. It's when life becomes uncomfortable and they are at that point where they're like, I don't want to keep repeating these patterns. I can see the patterns now. So there is that coaching side of life where you can, press the pause button, ask yourself, what do I really want to have happen here? So when a situation is happening, whether it's with a partner, and the same patterns of behavior are happening, and they're not being kind or thoughtful or aware, or you're not being kind or thoughtful or aware, or both of you aren't being kind, thoughtful or aware, it's like, what? So those one-liners, those horrible ways of communicating comes out. And it's about asking yourself, what am I digging into it? What am I really asking him or her? What's the highest purpose behind me saying that? Actually, I love him and I miss the connection. So while I'm saying, right, go away, get out, I want a divorce, what I really want to say is, come here, I want to get back to that loving, kind relationship. It's asking yourself those questions, those hard questions. What do I really want to have happen here? What needs to happen in order for that to happen? Yeah. So what kind of behavior do I need to do for me to get the outcome that I have? Because the outcome that I'm feeling and experiencing is not gracious, it's not kind, it's not thoughtful, and it's not respectful. I'm not being those things, and he or she is not receiving those things and therefore sending them back to me. So now we're in this kind of bind, it's backwards and forwards. So pressing the pause button, drawing the line, and asking, you can only take ownership of yourself. So stepping out of the blame game, I would say, is number one. Owning your stuff, because we all play into being unkind, being unthoughtful, being disrespectful, being unaware, and then asking yourself, digging into that, what am I really trying to achieve here? What am I really asking for? Because seldom do we just come out and say what we really mean. I love you, I want to be with you, or I'm sorry, this job isn't working for me, I quit.
She was making such a great point because, especially when we talk about repeating behaviours and, you know, not saying what we really want to say, and that is definitely not being graceful.
Absolutely. That is one way of not being graceful and obviously dishonoring. And I agree with everything. I'm looking at this from through a different lens right now because, yeah, absolutely. We definitely need to look at ourselves. We definitely need to look at our triggers. We definitely need to look at our own wounds. But how do those wounds show up? So you asked, how do you recognize when someone's not being graceful? Or how would they recognize it? I think that the biggest tells would be, number one, if there's judgment of themselves or judging others, if they are in a state of shame and denial about things, which will then cause those triggers that you now need to go deal with, right? These things cause those triggers. Guilt, feeling rejected or rejecting others, that separation, that segregation that I was speaking about earlier, and some people in repression, right? That's a big one, that codependence of repression, because someone, in order to keep that peace, in order to keep that flow in their relationship, if we go with Patricia's, is that they're repressing what they're really feeling. They're not really saying anything, but they're kind of going with the flow and not rocking the boat. And that is a way of definitely dishonoring and not being gracious to yourself. And also, believe it or not being gracious to the other person, because you're allowing them to act in a very dishonorable way and not putting up your boundaries that Patricia was talking about earlier. So, those are the major six wounds is what I'm going to say, like the 6 ways, base triggers that show up with our inner children, that show up with our personal triggers, that show up with things that we need to reintegrate into our lives because we've let go of because of these things. And it's really about, what are we repressing? What are we in denial about, whether it's about for ourselves or someone else? Are we feeling shame and guilt? Those are major, and those are usually about, a lot of people have those secrets. And are we dishonoring ourselves by keeping that shame and guilt and repressing how it's causing triggers in us? Rejection is a big one also, rejecting others, rejecting ourselves, rejecting what we're feeling, and separation, feeling separate, feeling alone, separating ourselves from other people because of whatever reasons, right? So these things are a big cause of all of those triggers that we definitely need to go get help with. So it's not just about being kind and gracious to others and respecting them and being compassionate about where they are in their lives, because it might not be where we want them to be, but it doesn't matter. It's where they are, right? And so it's that compassion to where they are, but also being compassionate and forgiving to ourselves and saying, okay, I did this, or I need to work on this, or being upfront with ourselves, no longer dishonoring those triggers, no longer dishonoring the cause of those things, and saying, okay, I got you, and we got to deal with this now, because I love myself, because I want to be kind to me, so then I can be kind to everyone else and be my best for them, regardless of how they act. I think about my mom, right? I love her to pieces, but yet she drives me around the bend, right? She'll come in, and within 10 minutes, she's, is that dish in the sink? Why are you doing this? Why did you move that piece of furniture over there? Did you gain weight? Did you take off weight? Why are you wearing that? And this is her love language. Mm-hmm. This stuff used to annoy me to pieces. And I'd be like, why do you walk in my house? Why do you even talk? That's what I used to say to her, stop talking, right? And now it's like I look at her, and when she does that, I love her more, because that's her love language. That's how she loves. And there's no way ever that I'm going to change her. It doesn't matter how much I get upset about it. It doesn't matter how much I ask her. It doesn't matter how much I say, Mom, it really hurts me when you say those things, right? It doesn't matter about any of that because that's just who she is. And I have to be compassionate about her fears and the things that she's gone through in her life and her triggers. And this is her defense mechanism. And she doesn't want to change it. She doesn't know how, nor does she even want to hear about it or accept it because she's not in that place. So I sit there and I show her compassion. I understand her. I love her. And, you know, I understand that that's how she loves. Right? So if she doesn't come in and say that stuff to me now, I'm like, what's wrong?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And Aisha, you make such an important point there because it is about understanding, you know, and I think we may have the same mother because my mum is exactly the same. But now that I understand her, I'm able to be more gracious to her. But really, had I known and was practicing grace from before, I could have been more understanding of her even before that, because her behavior shouldn't affect whether I'm graceful towards her or not, because grace is about me. It's not really about her. It's about how I deal with it. But because I had to go through that, just learning to understand her, and it's like, right, okay, now I understand her. I already know how to be graceful. Now I can be graceful. That was the process I went through. But this is why I say grace is a hack, because had I known different before, I would have been able to save myself years and years of upset and irritation and frustration with my mum, because I would have just been able to just be with her. And that would have, we would have had a very different relationship if I was able to do that. However, I do believe that things happen the way they have to happen, because had it not happened like that, I perhaps wouldn't have learned some valuable lessons. But using grace as a hack can definitely enhance our relationships without a doubt.
So what I'm hearing is that there's this awareness that comes first, awareness of graciousness, of being a hack, awareness of patterns of behavior within oneself that isn't necessarily kind or thoughtful or aware, the awareness of that within someone else, like your mum, for example. Then comes like this willingness to change it, a willingness that I could feel it inside, this little, like a little sprout, just kind of a willingness to change. There's the ownership of one's own behavior, the ownership of how you respond in life and how you move through life. Comes the understanding, which then comes the acceptance. So once you understand your mum and all of those intricacies, there's an acceptance. You accept her, that it's an unconditional love, isn't it? It's an acceptance. And then from that acceptance comes that space of gracefulness. So you accept who she is, you accept how you are, and then you can be you within it all. It's lovely.
So well put. I love that. Thank you, Patricia. That's a great summary. Just summing that all up in that way, that was beautiful. Thank you. Absolutely. And then it's about allowing yourself to grow with it. Like, now what else can I become? Taking, graciousness into levels. I mean, you can become very gracious. Again, always being aware of your self-respect. I think because I think that's where the trick is, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. If we're gracious to other people, we always have to make sure that we are more gracious to ourselves first. Because being gracious doesn't mean, oh, that's just how they are, I'm going to let them be like that. Right? So, yes, that's some of it. But if my mom went over the top and started like yelling and screaming about stuff and blaming me for things and whatever, I'd be like, hold on a second. Not okay. Now you're going a little bit too far. Right?
Yeah,
It's
it's the
not
boundary
okay.
moment, isn't it? Bringing your boundaries in place, but also not in that harsh way, because you're aware that this is your mum and, she doesn't have the tools and blah, blah. You can, it's that you can be gracefully putting your boundaries in place. I'm not accepting that, actually. And that's okay to be that. And within that comes courage, doesn't it?
Yep. Right? I love the word courage.
Yeah,
I love the
courage.
word courage. Sorry,
Definitely.
sorry, Gail, just one sec. I love the word courage because it's like, Courage is to do the right thing, or to be kind, or to be gracious, or to do the work that you need to do on yourself, or make the changes despite your fear of it, despite your fear of how that other person or how that thing is going to affect you.
Yeah. A lot of the time we stay in that fear because we're in that fear of loss. We fear losing the other or that connection, no matter how toxic it could be. So a lot of the time we remain in that for a lot longer than we ought, really, until we get to that point where something happens and you have to take ownership. And wouldn't it be great to get to that point consciously and graciously, rather than when the universe slaps you around the chops? And you know, yeah. So yeah, I suppose following the plan, really, isn't it? It's growing that sense of awareness of self, and asking yourself those questions. What is it that I really want to have happen here? What is my outcome? How do I want to feel and be in this situation? What's going to be beneficial for you and I in this scenario? And asking, I love the question. Being in the question is another topic that I'd love to discuss one day on Clubhouse, and the power of the question, and that kind of possibility that comes from the question. And I suppose just questioning one's own behaviour in any given moment is the beginning of graciousness.
Yeah, that's fine. What I was going, well, what I was going to say was around the word courage, but Patricia put it so eloquently, because it is such a beautiful word, because it is about having the courage to just honor ourselves. And Patricia said earlier on about not being a spiritual doormat, and I think that's quite a challenge for many people who feel that they are gracious, or they're heart led, they're spiritual, they're intuitives, however they want to label themselves. But many people who really operate from their heart space do feel sometimes as if, because they are gracious, or they're understanding, that they're not holding their boundaries. They feel that maybe they're not holding their boundaries as well as they would like to. So having that courage to just be who you are, but just to be able to still hold that boundary whilst being respectful, whilst being kind, and all the other things that we've spoken about today, does take a degree of courage and bravery. And it's really funny that we should be talking about this today, because yesterday I was going through some stuff. I had to work through some stuff. So I was using my cards. I've got this set of cards that when I'm trying to battle things out, they're just so good. I often turn to them for guidance. And the one card that kept coming up, because I almost didn't want to accept it. So I kept going back and saying, oh, no, what is it really? And the card that kept coming up was actually around being brazen. And I thought, oh, this isn't a situation for brazen. You're not understanding me. Arguing with spirit, of course. So I did it again. And then the next card that came up alongside the brazen, I've got them both here with me, was actually speak your truth. It's time to speak up. I thought, wow. And that is something that I think resonates really, really strongly with what we're speaking about today. Just having that courage to speak up, to be a bit more brazen, but you can still do that in a respectful, honourable, and graceful way.
Always speaking your truth is so important. Like, being graceful doesn't mean shutting up. It does mean absolutely speaking your truth, but like you said, in a very respectful way, and not being that concerned. Like, you want people to understand what you're saying, but we also have to understand that the other person has had different experiences in their life. They've been victimized in different ways, and they might not perceive, it's perception as well, right? So they might not perceive what you're saying in the way or in the light that you're saying it. So we can't always, we're not responsible ever for how another person hears us. So are they listening? And I'm going to be very one side or the other here. Are they listening through the ears of looking for dishonor, or are they looking for grace? Because whatever we look for, we will find. So if we're looking for someone, if we're used to being dishonored, then that's how we're listening. So even if you deliver that to me in a very gracious way, I may not hear it that way. But that's up to me. That's on me. That's got nothing to do with you. So yes, absolutely. We do need to sometimes just say what we need to say it respectfully, say it through the eyes, through the lens of graciousness, and we can't be responsible for how anyone else hears us. So that's a huge one. That's a huge one. And the questions, I love that Patricia brought that up, and we definitely need to do something about that, because questions bring amazing answers, and not why questions, like staying away from those. That's dishonoring yourself, because why questions, except for why do you want to attain that goal? That's a good why question. But any other place, why questions are victim questions. What you want to know is how, what can I do? How can I, how, what, where, like those other questions, staying away from why, honoring yourself and getting those answers that you've been looking for by asking those questions. So definitely want to talk about that some more as well on another one, because that's
And that
another whole
that
thing.
it is, but then the divine intervention can take place because you're kind of off graciously offering it up to something outside of yourself when you ask those questions. What needs to happen right now? What kind of inspiration do I need that's going to take me from A to B? You're kind of offering it up to something bigger, and that divine intervention, that juice can come flooding through. But as you were speaking, both of you there, about speaking your truth, it's that when you say no to someone else, you're actually saying yes to yourself. And it all, when we remember that, and we remember that everything has divine timing, and that with you saying no, it could kickstart a whole set of dominoes that is so beneficial for someone else in that moment, and also it could be so beneficial to you. You're playing with consciousness. You're playing, going down the stream easily at that point, bringing up the oars of the boat and just going down the stream of ease, rather than fighting against it by not speaking your truth. But again, that speaking your truth thing, over the years, I've come to realize that it seems like, I don't want to be gender specific per se, but a lot of women find it very difficult to speak their truth. It's like they've had their throat chakra cut off. And for the male, the divine masculine, their heart chakra has been cut off. They can't, they're not allowed to feel and cry and be empathic and have all those things that um, have have usually been kind of brought over to the feminine. And the feminine can't be brazen and speak her truth and speak her mind. We do have two templates that have been squiffed over the years that we're working through as well. There's the personal and the collective that's happening here, when it comes to speaking our truth and living from our hearts, and reconnecting those together and opening those up. And I think and when we think about the hows and the whys of it all, but it comes back down to just that willingness of making a difference, making a change. And when we make that small little change, even if it is just practicing the ability to say no, listening to our energies and what feels right to give. If we're giving all the time, and it's like, no, I'm going to give to myself, even on that level, just practicing that will help. The momentum will bring it forward a little bit more for you, to just the willingness of making those changes and practicing the art of being graceful to yourself, by asking for what you need when you need it and acting on it. Yeah.
Well said. Anything to add, Gail?
No, I don't actually. I think that's been said quite perfectly, because it is, again, if not to be gender specific, but certainly in my experience, it has been quite a few women who have shied away from speaking their truth. However, what I have found is men do have the same issue, but they have it in a different circumstance. So what I found is that generally women find it hard to speak up and really, be honourable with their word. Well, not honourable with their word, but just in honouring themselves with their word. They have more of a challenge in doing that in terms of their work, certainly in terms of their relationships. And men, it tends to show up not so much in their work, but in their relationships. So you find that a lot of partnerships, one of the main complaints is, oh, he doesn't talk to me, or he doesn't know how to speak to me, or he doesn't actually, speak his truth. And having spoken to a number of men over the years through another project that I'm involved with, I find that to becoming more and more common, that men, they're no problem when they're outward facing to the rest of the world, but when they're inward facing on a more intimate, vulnerable level, that's where their challenge is. So that's an interesting. That would be something interesting to explore in coming weeks.
Absolutely. Great topics coming up here as I'm jotting them down for the next conversations. So, absolutely. I want to thank you, ladies, for joining me on this conversation. Today, it was something that really felt. Last night, I just put it together last night, and I was like, I just really think that we need to talk about this. And I'm so happy that the two of you joined me in this conversation, and I can't wait for us to share this out there. It's such a huge topic, and it's such a powerful energy, graciousness. It holds a powerful energy as much as dishonor holds, but in another light, obviously, on the other end of the spectrum. And the beauty of graciousness, I think that if we live it, if we do our best, it's hard to live it all the time, but if we do our best to be gracious and be aware of it and have it in our lens all the time, we will find, I think, that the relationships that we're in with other people will automatically begin to change. Our communication with those people will begin to change. And even if they don't do the work, which we can't ask them to do unless they want to, even if they don't do the work, the relationship will still improve.
It's true.
Yeah, it has to improve because it's the like attracts like thing. So if you're working from that place of graciousness and working from that and coming from that place of higher vibration, it will connect into that part in them. And it may not the first go.
It may not happen right away. It may take a few times for you. Just stick it through. Stay gracious, and you will find that maybe not the first, second time, but the third, the fourth, the fifth time, the response that you're getting will be very different than what you're used to.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's been a fabulous discussion this afternoon. A really, really great discussion, actually. One that I think is going to offer some really great moments of insight for many people. So I'm looking forward to doing more of these.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Patricia.
Thank you. I had a lovely time. I'm gonna be walking tall and in a higher vibe with that awareness of gracefulness. Let's see how long it lasts.
Forever.
Yay!
All right, ladies, have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you all.